My name is Rebecca Zabarski, and you are watching the Global TV Demand Awards Virtual Festival. It is such a pleasure to be sitting here with Amy Ziering, director and producer of the HBO documentary series Alan v. Farrow, which is a top 5 finalist in the true crime category for the Global TV Demand Awards. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to know a little bit more about how you began researching the subject of Alan v. Farrow, and why was it so important to tell the story when you did, which was February 2021, which is when it premiered?
You know, I like to say our films find us, and we were actually doing a very different project. It was just women who were speaking out in the wake of Me Too, because Kirby and I had done 2 other films in the sexual assault space long before this was trending or anything, a topic. Long before Me Too, we had done The Invisible War in 2012, and then The Hunting Ground. Invisible War broke the story of the epidemic of rape in our military, and then The Hunting Ground talked about the epidemic of rape on our campuses. So then when Me Too happened, my cell phone started exploding, and everyone was like, you know, everyone's speaking now, you should be in the space. So we just started interviewing people, anyone who wanted to speak. And one of the interviews was Dylan. And in the course of speaking with her, I was like, wait, what? Like, I realized so much of her story didn't jive with everything I'd remembered, you know, over the last 3 decades of hearing about this, right? I'm of the generation, I'm almost 60. So, you know, I'm exactly the demographic that grew up, you know, with Woody Allen films and then with this whole scandal, you know. And so I remember how it was reported at the time. I remember my analysis of it, and it radically differed from everything Dylan was telling me. So after the interview, I called Kirby and I called Amy Hurdy, the other executive producer on the series. And I was like, I think there's something there. It's really bizarre. She said this, and I don't remember that, blah, blah. And then Amy Hurdy, who's amazing investigative reporter, she goes, let me go at it. Let me dive in. So she just started diving in and doing this research and coming back to Kirby and I and going, I found this, I found that. And that was the genesis of the project. So it really happened very organically. And we're just grateful that when it did get released, you know, it really did seem to be riding a zeitgeist kind of moment where people are now looking back retrospectively at a lot of stories that the media did not do right by and our society did not do right by. So we kind of ended up, the timing of that was kind of interesting.
It must have been fascinating to have experienced the news cycle when it was originally happening, and then being able to dive deeper and possibly remembering those moments of hearing the news and stories about Woody Allen in the 90s, and now being able to share that story, you know, of Dylan's story and others.
Yeah, no, it's a strange thing in life, right? I mean, back then, never, and I was an academic, never in a million years did I ever imagine there'd be any personal intersection of my life with that narrative, you know? So, you know, yeah.
Well, and you mentioned Amy Hurdy. So that was one of your collaborators, the investigative journalist for the project. And there was so much research that you all did in terms of uncovering original documentation. And of course, those phone calls, which really were a moment when I was watching the show of like, you know, when you're sitting on your couch and you're watching something and you kind of sit up, right? And you lean in and you're like, wow, this is like a moment of, oh my God, I want to hear every single moment of this. That's how I felt when I listened to those phone calls. So I'm curious, you know, as a filmmaker, how do you decide what makes it in the series and what you have to leave out?
Oh gosh, well, it's a whole algorithm of considerations, right? I mean, you have to A, be very careful that everything you're doing is rigorously fact-checked. You have to B, make sure you're crafting a really compelling narrative that everybody can follow. And this was complicated. I mean, their family tree alone could be like a 20-part series, right? I mean, like,
I almost wanted to draw something, actually.
Well, trying to figure out how to condense and tackle and convey that information without confusing everybody was like, 10 years of my life I'll never get back. But the whole thing was just this constant rubrics puzzle challenge. I mean, and I really hope, I know that filmmakers who watch it do kind of appreciate the art, craft, and effort that went into sort of forging it. So, but when we did find those, when Amy Hurdy, she was Mia was honestly very trepidatious, as you can imagine, and well, she a well-earned trepidation. I mean, she didn't really trust anyone and trust us. I mean, she'd never been done right by. So it was a very careful relationship. And Amy was granted permission to be at her house for a short period of time just to gather some documents. And Mia literally was walking out to the trash with a box because they had gone, and Amy was like, well, what are you throwing out? She's like, just some bad memories, just some cassette tapes. And he was like, cassette tapes? Why do you have cassette tapes? And she's like, oh, well, Woody was taping me. So my son said, you should start taping him. So, this came up in the trial, blah, blah. And Amy was like, whoa, 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 before you throw those out, can I just borrow them for a second? And then when she played them for us, I mean, you talk about it, but like, we were all like jaw dropped, like, oh my God, like, if you just, to be able to hear the narrative, not retold, but told in real time by the people, that's pretty, it was pretty amazing. So yeah, it was a lucky filmmaking moment.
Yeah. A lot of people reacted online, lots of conversation, lots of coverage, of course. And it's a controversial subject with this really beloved creator, and people are sort of confronted with a reality that they have to kind of go back and decide for themselves. How do I feel about this? Yeah. My question for you is, do you think there is a narrative missing in all of the coverage or the conversations that you've seen online for, whether it's journalists or just people who are commenting on the story? What is missing around the narrative of the show?
God, is that a good question? I don't think a lot was missing, honestly, but again, I'm old and I'm not a social media person. I mean, like, my kids are grateful that I figured out email, honestly. So I'm not Insta, I'm not Twitter, and I would get hints of the conversations. People would send me things just to sort of, which I appreciated, but I guess, so I don't want to presume because I wasn't sort of carefully following the public narrative, which was immense. Mm-hmm. I would just say that I don't know what's missing, but I would hope that this was exemplary and not taken as a one-off story, but seen as a systemic problem about the way we all shy away from any kind of incest stories. We don't want to hear them. We don't want to believe them. And all the lives that have been damaged in the wake of that societal bias, and I think this narrative is an allegory or exemplary of a much bigger issue. It's not just about, and that's what I would want or hope. And that's what we tried to do, by, as it's not, we do follow the story, but we also break out to larger issue commentaries, with experts talking about the false parental alienation syndrome, which is a mythical conceit that to this day is used in courts to send children who are abused back to their fathers, So it's that kind of cultural awakening that we were hoping the film would spark. So I don't know if that's missing, but I'm hoping that would be, this would be a catalyst for that larger, more as important, if not more important, conversation.
Yeah. Have you received any feedback from viewers? Like, are people reaching out to you and sharing their stories? And yeah,
we got tremendous outpouring, and there was sadly, and there was RAIN. I forget what that anagram stands for, but it's the National Network for Survivors of Rape and Incest Abuse. Mm-hmm. They said that every single time the series played the opening episode or whatever, how it was over 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So they said that at the premiere of each new episode, there was like a 20% uptick in calls. And, and we got a lot of emails from people just thanking us, saying, our story, the story of incest survivors really hasn't been told. And then I had one friend, this was kind of sad, and I didn't know, and she called me and she said, you don't know this about me, but my daughter and I, we watched the first episode 4 times in a row because it told our story. Like, we were seeing ourselves in our life, and it helped us make sense of what we had experienced, in our own sort of gaslighting incest situation. I was really moved by that. I mean, she was like, she said, I can't thank you enough. So we've been hearing a lot of responses like that, as we know, seeing representations of things really helps move our culture forward.
Is that something, when you're thinking about your future projects, you've obviously faced a lot of very deep and very hard topics, all the projects that you have chosen. What is it about that intrigues you? I mean, they're intriguing, but it is a hard place to live, and I am curious about your interest there and maybe your goals for unearthing the truth. I don't know. That's why I want to ask you, what is it about these topics? We've it's lumped into a true crime category in TV. But really it's just true and real stories. What is it about that is the most intriguing to you?
It's a hard place to live, but for me, it's the only place to live. Like I've been watching the true crime frenzy, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. I mean, it's interesting because it's very instantly gratifying, right? You have this illusion of justice, and I say illusion heavily. You have this satisfaction of something bad happening out there, not to you. I mean, I understand why we are now more than ever kind of clinging in this world of complete uncertainty. That kind of narrative is very appealing. It's kind of a horror show, but it's the same psychological effect of watching a horror film to some extent, where there's something horrible happens far away, you feel better about it, you can follow it, it's interesting, and then you go away. But my problem with that whole genre is it doesn't really challenge the criminal justice system or talk about it at all. And B, in a way, it could be kind of reactionary because it, keeps insisting problems are individual and not systemic, which we all know is not true. So on a political level, it disturbs me. So I was glad that we were able to ride the true crime wave, but for a bigger and better purpose, and which I would hope other filmmakers would strive to do as well. Like, I hope that people start opening up their true crime to sort of actually examine the larger issues as well, I guess is what I would say about that. But I don't know, people ask, why do you do what you do? It's like, I'm just wired this way. I can't kind of take credit. This is what interests me. And this is, I'm always been interested in social change and politics. So I guess that's what interests me in projects that we pick.
Well,
but they're not easy. They're very hard, and you don't come out the same. But someone's got to do them.
Yeah. That's something that I always love asking creators and filmmakers is, how did this project change you?
Oh yeah, therapy, sleeping pills. It's not fun. I don't like to talk about it because I don't want to dissuade other people, but we are viral creatures. Our stories infect each other, and inform each other. We're communal. So that's what I mean. Like, if you live these other people's lives and their realities and their truths and go deep in them, they don't leave you, so they all transform you. It's like having children. So I hope it's transformed me, and I know that it definitely has put me in traumatic spaces, and I definitely has, helped me grow as a human being as a result.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the growth of true crime as a genre, and that's something that we have seen with our global demand data. I mean, it has exploded, and there's actually more demand for the genre than there is supply. And of course, we've seen an explosion of true crime shows and podcasts and those type of stories. And I found that very interesting, what you said about instant gratification and kind of this idea that we as a viewer, we can sit there and, depending on the story, feel like there's been some kind of resolution. But it is troubling. And even as a viewer, it's troubling to sit and watch and kind of question, why am I enjoying this so much? And so, our audience consists of a lot of filmmakers and people who are interested in creating that type of content. What is something that you would tell somebody who's interested in telling a true crime story? What kind of advice would you give as a filmmaker yourself?
Well, capitalize on the wave by making it a thriller. I mean, you have all the elements of a thriller, so it's great. And you've got a great 3-act structure. So it's sort of laid up. It's like an easy layup for a filmmaker. But again, I would just repeat what I said before, but look for the bigger social issues. Like, is there a racist component? Is it an accident? Like, is there, can you talk about that? Can you talk about, our idea of the criminal justice system, how problematic that is, as opposed to the neat narrative of, oh, justice has been served, we found the bad guy. If it's about abuse, I would like for, what would be interesting for someone to do is look at the psychology of men who abuse, and as opposed to just, throwing away and locking the key and seeing, to what degree have they themselves been victims? It's that kind of, there's a simplification that we have with these narratives that I would want people to more shy away from and dive into more of the complications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope we see more of that. There's a lot of opportunity to create right now and a lot of distribution. So, my hope as, again, a viewer, when I see series like yours, is that there is interest. Obviously, we see there's global demand. I mean, this show is popular all around the world. This is not just a US based statistic that I share, about its popularity. So, I hope that we do see shows and subjects with a little bit more depth, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, we can afford that as a culture and a community. Like, okay, you want to be entertained, but let's also have some thoughts, yeah.
Well, and now there
have some thinking be invited into that entertainment is what I would say.
Well, and I love this, the genre, because it does invite conversation and it does ask people to reflect. And, you mentioned that story of the mother and daughter who rewatched the show. They're having very deep conversations after they're watching it. I'm having those conversations myself with my husband. Just talking about it and just having that conversation is so important to getting the cause out into the world and shining a light on it. I find that incredibly impactful when we talk about shows, and we're not just looking at top shows in the world. Like, what's the real impact behind it? It's this ability to encourage conversations between people who might not talk about this. I found that really interesting after watching.
Yeah, and I guess you made me think of something else as you were speaking, is that I would say that I would love for people to think about sort of, it should be a cautionary tale about our desire to put celebrities on this pedestal and grant them impunity, and for us to be a lot more wary and careful of that moving forward, and check that. I mean, I understand the desire and the passion and the love we have for people that entertain us and give us these wonderful worlds to lose ourselves in and help us see ourselves differently, but it then shouldn't be conflated with then their private actions. We have to really always understand privately, it might be something else might really be going on, and be open to hearing and understanding that. That would be a really great growth thing for us as a culture as well.
Absolutely. So I have one question left for you. This is, a little zoomed out, a little bit more thinking about entertainment in general. Looking ahead into the new year, into 2022, what would you say is the most revolutionary thing about entertainment right now?
Oh my God, it's completely revolutionary. I think we're in a whole paradigm shift. I mean, it's like, we're watching, and it's odd, right? But no, this whole streaming thing and the dominance of streaming is the most revolutionary thing, and seeing what's going to happen with theatrical and movies in general, even as an entertainment form. I think that, I see this shift to series now and shorter bites and the way we're processing information. So that's shifting. All those, yeah, it's a very, and but the thing we have to be very wary of and aware of is the consolidation of power as well. If you have fewer sources greenlighting projects, and the people greenlighting projects are chasing algorithms, it's not always going to be a win for creativity.
Mhm.
And for edgy things and for things that are critical of the status quo. So those things, those are the things that keep me up at night about the way things are shifting. But it's a very dynamic, interesting time.
It is. I often call it the Wild West. We're in the Wild West era of entertainment.
Yeah. It's bizarre. It's interesting.
It really is. Amy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This was such a wonderful series to dive into and to reflect on. Hopefully there will be a lot more reflections about pieces like this going in depth in the new year. And thank you again.
I hope so. Thank you. Great questions. Appreciate it.